they're not significant or important by themselves, but collectively they make up the body, and that's what our central message is today. God's called you to your role. You need to know that your part is important. In the same way that this training is important also, because everybody has to do this training each year. Even Jono, for example, will do this training. So it's a collective thing that everyone has to go through. I'm not quite sure it's going to be as entertaining as Katie said it was going to be. It might actually be a bit depressing in places, but never the mind about that. We'll just keep on going. So every part is essential for the functioning of Access, and this is from the biblical verse, promoting our unity and our mutual care. And our mutual care, of course, is that unity and mutual care create a safe environment within the church. So one important message right up front is for us never to say, as leaders within the church, somebody should do something about that, if it's a safety concern. All of us have a role within that. And if your role is not to fix it because it's not something that you're capable of doing, it's your role to tell somebody who can fix it. So obviously we have Jono, we have our board, we have a safety officer, we have various leaders within the church, but we all play a part and we all need to respond to a safety concern. In our briefing topics for the day, there are mandatory things that we must go through. One being child protection, risk management, workplace health and safety, and our expectations. I should have just mentioned before that we had a wonderful number of people in church today, and I know it's all because we're doing the safety briefing, but if we do it every week, we'll just pack the church out, won't we, and the hall as well. Anyway, we're going to go through those 4 topics, and as I said, it's mandatory that we actually cover each one of those topics. They all come or are led and informed by our church policy. We have a handbook of the Wesleyan Methodist Church, which is updated every 4 years. There's another document called Policies and Procedures of the Wesleyan Methodist Church. And just pointing those out, because if you would like to see copies of that, we can organise that for you. There's also local church policies, and one of the important local church policies that will be you've been given a copy of is the People Protection and Risk Management. And that's updated annually in January. So you can see the cycle within that, the one for 4 years, one for an annual event, and updated annually in June, and then annually in January. As well as the People Protection and Risk Management, Access Church has a range of other policies, one being our privacy policy, one being our complaints management policy. And they're compulsory for all organisations to actually have those policies. But we also have like an induction program, we have first aid protocols, we have workplace health and safety protocols, we have food safety training that you can do. Can I just have an indication, who has a food safety health certificate? Terrific. And technically, if you are actually serving food within your ministry, you need to go through and do this course. It's a very easy course, and at the end of it, you get this beautiful certificate. So it's all very worthwhile within that. We also have the evacuation plan and the lockdown plan within it. So a lot of local church policies as well as the national policies. So let's start off with the People Protection and Risk Management policy. And this policy aims to look for what is the foreseeable harm. So foreseeable harm means that we see something that could actually turn out to be a problem and we're actually going to deal with it. So the foreseeable harm to all participants within the church, not just children, not just our young people, not just our vulnerable people, but everyone. That's why the document is called People Protection and Risk Management. Even though it has a very big focus on child protection, it really is for everyone as well. So we need to ensure that all people that work within the church, work within Access, have to be assessed for their suitability. So we have to make sure that we have the appropriate people as leaders. So there's a little process that we'll talk about and how that kind of works within that. To work with children under the principles of child-safe organisations, and we'll talk again a little bit about child-safe organisations further through. I probably should mention now that if we're talking about children, we're talking about people under 18. And we probably have 17-year-olds that get a little bit offended about being called a child. But anyone under 18 under the law is regarded as a child. So the last point just popping up now is that we all need to know what our responsibilities are in relation to those things previously mentioned. And if you don't, it is part of your responsibility to ask one of the leaders about what does this mean and what do I have to do. Throughout this presentation too, you'll notice that I have a biblical reference down at the bottom of the slide, and I won't be referring to that frequently. So if you can just, while you're glancing through, have a look at that as well. But I'll just read this one out. See that you do not despise the little ones, for I tell you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven. So it's just pointing to the fact that, yes, we're talking about child protection because it's a focus, but there is also follow-up for everybody in the church. So when a child or young person has suffered sufficient harm, is suffering harm, or is in the possibility of the future suffering harm. And this sentence is just to show that it's past, present, and future, that we need to make a response within that. The other part is that the unfortunate part of society today is that not all children have a parent or a caregiver who can look after them appropriately. So we need to be looking out for that as well. So in the definition up in the top corner is harm is any detrimental effect of a significant nature on the physical, psychological, or emotional well-being. Often when we're thinking of abuse, we jump to the conclusion that it's just physical, but it certainly is psychological and emotional abuse. So chasing that through again, physical, sexual, emotional, and neglect. And neglect is one, again, that you don't hear a lot about in the media. We hear mostly, I guess, about sexual abuse, sometimes physical abuse, but less about emotional and neglect. But all of those are important elements that we need to monitor within the people that we're interacting with. Often in a group, you'll get a disclosure happening. And again, we're talking about a child under 18 years of age. If you get a disclosure from somebody over 18 years of age, your advice to them would be different to how you deal with a child. So if the child says to you, "Can I tell you something, but I don't want you to tell anyone else?" How are we going to respond to that sort of disclosure? In the first instance, you need to advise the child that if they tell you about something that is unlawful in their behaviour, you do not have a choice. We are legally obliged to pass on that information within that. So you'll pass that on to the pastor. In a situation where a person has revealed something to you, your response has to be calm and considered. Don't react in a shocked or a critical way. Need to provide support for the person. You need to discuss in a confidential place. Now, the confidential place can't be in a locked room with that person or a closed-up room with that person. Often in our groups, if you can take the person over to one side where you're still within the eyesight of a number of people, then that's quite appropriate. If it has to be in a room, so pointing to the rooms over there, you would leave the door open within that. I'm just, because it's flicking into my mind, I can remember a particular case that I had when two girls came to see me, and as soon as they came into the office, I was the principal, as soon as they came into the office, they went and closed the door themselves. And you can't be, as a principal, in an office with two girls and think that that's going to be okay for the long term. So the door had to be open, and there have been other cases whereby I've told one of my deputy principals, walk past the room every now and then and just look in, because we have to protect ourselves as much as protecting the child and helping the child as well. So discuss in a confidential place, but not completely hidden. Very important in a disclosure is not to probe or tell them how they feel. So you can ask questions like what happened next, but you shouldn't be probing to the extent that you're changing the story that they're telling you. And certainly don't tell them how they should be feeling. So you're not saying, oh, that must have been really bad for you, it must have been disgusting for you, or whatever. You're just taking the information in a disclosure and taking that on board, and you're going to be recording that. So you make a written summary straight after the event, write it all down, and then you'll be passing it on to the pastor. So there's something new that's coming out or has come out in October last year, and it's called reportable conduct. And we'll be talking again a little bit more about that. But a reportable conduct includes a child sexual offence against a child, sexual misconduct committed in relation to or in the presence of a child, ill treatment of a child, significant neglect of a child, physical violence committed in relation to and or in the presence of a child, and behaviour that causes significant emotional or psychological harm to a child. Now, the reason for reading all those out is that this is, if you like, new legislation that's just come out in October, which is interesting for us in Queensland. Interesting for us because all these things are covered within your people protection and risk management document anyway. And then the final thing, the reportable conduct scheme comes into law to be enforced on the 1st of July. It's in place now, but we have to show that we've got it in place by the 1st of July 2026. In the broader sense of safety, an analogy I've used before, an acronym I've used before is PARA. And if you know about prefixes and suffixes and that, you'll know that PARA means to be alongside or to support somebody within that. And it's in words like parachute or paramedical kind of thing within that. And using that acronym is useful for some of the key messages. Safety is a place or a person. And people who have been in Access for many years will know that we used to talk about it being a safe place. We wanted to develop Access as a safe place where people felt loved and people felt really confident about being here. So it's a place, but it's also a person. There are various people that we know that we can relate to that will be, we know that they're going to be safe. Safety is an attitude, A for attitude in PARA. We have to take the attitude to safety, that safety is important. It's not something frivolous, and therefore I'm not doing a lot of jokes on the way through saying, sorry, Katie, within that. It has to be fairly serious in terms of our approach. We know that there are standards associated with safety, and we know that there are values that we have to hold true to in relation to our attitude towards safety. Some of our older people will remember that sometimes in our youth groups we used to do all sorts of strange, unsafe things. Anyone who remember fireball soccer? Oh. Okay, so safety is a responsibility, a requirement, and it's also part of our role. And finally, it's an attribute or a quality. So as an attribute, we have safety equipment, for example. We have safe areas. We have Jeff, who put a strip of material across my cords here so I won't trip on them. We have to think about the safety sort of attributes that we can bring into our interaction within the church or in our role within the church, but it's also a quality. And finally, safety is a situation in which or a place where you feel protected from harm. And that's the environment that we need to create within Access Church. One of the chief ways that we do that is through risk management. Risk management sounds like a boring thing, but it's something that you do and have done probably hundreds of times already today just to get here. Risk management is a matter of what are the possible consequences that could happen, whether I should go fast around the roundabout, whether I should give way to that car on the left or not, what speed I should go. There's a whole host of decisions we make which are all part of risk management, but it's a common process, it's something that we do all the time. The first step in risk management or risk assessment is what is the event, what are we actually doing? And the second part is where we're actually doing it. And that sounds very simple, but if we're doing an activity and we're doing it at church here, that's one thing. If we're doing it on a camp and we're out in the wilderness, that's an entirely different perspective in terms of the risk related to the activity. And of course, what we're actually doing, are we doing rock climbing? Hopefully not if we haven't got permission for that kind of thing within it. So what is the activity? And identifying the source of harm, what could possibly go wrong? You've heard that expression, what could possibly go wrong? And in safety, of course, you've got to go through and think, well, there are a number of things that could go wrong, and be identifying those. And by identifying those, you also can identify what would be the contributing factors, to the degree of risk. And would you believe that if you have primary school age children, there's a certain degree of risk because of their maturity, and if you have teenage children, it's less of a risk because they're far more mature. Is that right? All right, well, you consider those things as to what are the contributing factors. In some of our activities, we may have children that have difficulties in controlling their own behaviour. So you have to look at those sorts of factors too. Age profile, teachers will probably tell you that wet days can be a bit of a risk factor or in school, or windy days within that. So there are a number of contributing factors that need to be considered. And we need to consider what are the potential harmful consequences of the activity I'm doing and where I'm doing it. And if it's an activity whereby somebody might fall over and graze their leg, it's very different to you saying someone could get very seriously injured. It could be fatal if something went really wrong, just trying to use the two extremes. So what are the potential harmful consequences within that? And then the next part is, how likely is it to kind of occur? So you may be going to do something which is really dangerous. We'll leave out the death part, but really dangerous. But you might decide within your risk assessment that the chance of it happening is very, very, very slim. So it doesn't mean that you can't do it. Obviously, if it's a very dangerous sort of situation, a very high risk of somebody getting injured, then you have to think carefully about, no, I can't do this activity. It's too much of a risk associated with it. So the risk level acceptability, it's important to know that if we are doing risk assessments, if we get something which is very high risk and likely to kind of occur, you have to decide for yourself not to do it. But if you get a high-risk activity that's moderately likely to occur, you need to do a formal written risk assessment, and there's a risk assessment form that you can use for that. So just stressing that one more time, and I'll say this a couple of times on the way through, for all of our activities, you must do a risk assessment. You must. So if somebody gets injured and there's an investigation in association with that, one of the questions you'll be asked is, did you do a risk assessment? And the answer always has to be yes, that I did a risk assessment. I considered the event. I considered the sources of harm. I considered the contributing factors. I considered the harmful consequences. I decided that it was a very low risk and not likely to happen. Therefore, I didn't document it. But if it's in that higher sort of category, it needs to be documented, and you can get the forms available from church. In terms of our risk level acceptability, some people in life have an attitude that they're invincible. Nothing can happen to them. Have you heard that before or considered that before? The teenagers are mostly over there. So it's important in terms of realising that we all have a different profile in terms of how much risk we are personally willing to take. But when we're responsible for other people, we have to take a higher level of responsibility in terms of what is, in fact, acceptable. In a risk assessment, once you've gone through the process, you think about ways you could minimise the risk or remove the risk. Life is full of risk, and it's usually impossible to completely remove the danger or the harm that could possibly happen, but you can minimise the risk within that. And then what is the response strategies going to be? And part of the response strategies is knowing that, well, I've already said that they might fall over and graze their legs, and we're going to be over on the oval there, so maybe I should take a first aid kit with me. So minimising the risk is working out your response strategies. Minimising the risk or having response strategies may be making sure I've got my phone with me and I know how to phone the ambulance, 000. Within that. The final thing within a risk assessment is to do a review. because each time we do an activity, we should review to think about how can we do this better, how can we do it in a safer sort of way. So on the side there, for a safety emergency, skillful and competent action is needed. You need to be decisive. And what this is trying to say is that sometimes in an emergency or an accident sort of situation, you will see physically people gathered round and the person's lying there and they're patting them on the shoulder saying, there, but they're not really doing anything to seriously help them. So the decisiveness is we need to be able to step up, work out what needs to be done and support that person. So moving on, we have to cover the workplace health and safety topics. We're legally required to mention these. So this is part of our legislation in Queensland. Requires our church to ensure that we have safe systems for work. And part of having safe systems for work is having our policy documents. Ensure that we use and handle goods and substances appropriately. We need to provide information, instruction and training and supervision to our workers. Part of that is today. And part of your role, if you're an assistant leader, is to seek guidance from the leader of your particular group. We need to assess risks and implement appropriate measures to manage and control risks. And again, this is the list from the legislation, so some of it's just a little bit wordy and not quite matching what we do, but you'll get the point from it. We have to report notifiable incidences to workplace health and safety. We have to investigate incidents and make sure that we can eliminate them happening or remove the risk of them happening in the future. And finally, the church has to provide workers' compensation insurance for our paid workers. So we fulfil those workplace health and safety requirements. In terms of implementing our responsibilities and the management of activity, as I mentioned before, we've got something called leaders. Our leaders in the church have to be over 18, have to be adults. So if you're a leader in the church and you're 17 or 16 or 15, you need to know that technically you're called an assistant leader within that. So, sorry, I got the numbers wrong. If you're 16 or under, you're called a junior assistant. And this is just the technical names, not that anyone particularly worries about that. But the important thing is to say we must have a leader as an adult of our groups, 18 and over within that. And we also want to have them to be members of the Wesleyan Methodist Church. So I mentioned that. Some practical actions, some strategies and processes. We'll be talking about our duty of care and catering for people with special needs, being aware of our expectations. But I want to go through this list on the side here. In terms of our application, there needs to be 2 leaders present for an activity. And the significance of 2 leaders present, I sometimes get called back within that and say, if we're looking after the children out there and someone's got to take them to the toilet or stand outside the toilet while they're in the toilet, what does that mean? Because there's no longer 2 leaders in the room within that. Now, there must be 2 leaders scheduled for working within that, with that particular group. And if one leader has to go out for a short period of time and come back, then that's okay. We don't want to be hung up by that. It's partly for your protection as a leader, because you don't want somebody saying that somebody did something to me. It's always safer to have two leaders kind of present within that. Next one, stranger danger. You've heard the term stranger danger, but we're a church and we welcome anyone and everyone in. So who's the stranger? And that's the difficulty or the challenge that we have within us. And that's why we all have a responsibility for safety. We need to keep our eyes peeled. And if something doesn't look right, then we just don't let it pass by. We actually report it to someone and get the appropriate action taken. In terms of approved activities, I mentioned before that our program, especially if you are working with children or young adults, your program should be really approved by the board. So you need to be doing approved activities, and there are special considerations required. So, for example, if a group wanted to do an activity such as taking the children into a pool, then qualified instruction is important, is essential. I've lost the screen. Jeff? Working on it. Well, I'll keep on rolling through. I can see it. Yeah, so we should always appreciate our people that are working in the background, assisting us to make things happen. So qualified instructors, food safety I mentioned before. If you're serving food, and do that course, very easy. First aid kit, we have first aid kits available within the church here, and we have a defibrillator. Everyone know what a defibrillator is? If I'm lying on the ground and I look like I'm having a heart attack, would someone go and get the defibrillator, please? And there are instructions in terms of doing it. And the fact that you've never used it before, I'll forgive you if you get me started again. So we have that facility available, but there are first aid kits available and some that are portable that you can take away from the church if you're doing away activities within that. Transmittable disease. You might remember something called COVID-19. Remember that? Remember what we were doing in the church all the time, the washing of seats and everything else within that. Now, we don't hear much about COVID-19 anymore. Would it surprise you to know that there are people still dying in Queensland of COVID-19? Hundreds per year still. And there are still people dying, or there are people dying of influenza as well. So the important thing for us to remember in this is that there is transmittable disease. It's important that we keep our church clean, and we have excellent cleaners that do that, various people that do that. But anything to do with food safety, it's very important that our food safety people follow the regulations associated with that to prevent transmitting any sort of disease. Attendance roll. I was remiss in saying that you needed to sign on for the day, but they'll work out that you were here because you're going to fill out the forms at the end and they'll get it from that. But we're required to keep a copy of who has actually done this training within the church. There's also accident reports and incident reports. The difference between the two is an accident report is someone has fallen over and hurt themselves, and some intervention has kind of occurred in relation to that, and you fill out a report within that. Always good to let the parent know too, if they come to pick up the child afterwards, that you've administered some first aid. As you probably know these days, even putting a Band-Aid on a person is serious for some people because they're allergic to Band-Aids. So we have to be very careful within that, but we do an accident report. Now, an incident report is something that is not an accident, but is something that has happened that doesn't feel right. It could be you saw somebody talking to somebody and they did it in what seemed to be an inappropriate way, and they were trying to lead them around the back of the building or whatever. So an incident is an event that kind of occurred rather than an accident, and we have a form for doing that. Transporting children, it's important to know that in transporting children there are requirements related to that. It's always important to have 2 litres in the car when we're transporting children, and if you get to a situation where you can only have 1 litre in the car, having a child of your family in the car is a much better look than being alone with children in the car. There are also regulations about funny things. You have to have a licence and you have to not have P plates and whatever, but they're, I think, in your document there. All right, in the expectations, we need to make sure that we have appropriate communication with our people. Appropriate communication is if you're communicating to children, you can send out a block email that goes to all the children in your particular group, but you have to think twice about communicating with a single individual person within their group. And what I'd suggest you to do is, if you need to do that, you send a BCC or CC copy to another member of the group, another leader within the group, so that they can see what you are communicating to that child. If you've read anything or heard anything about grooming, the internet and using emails is a danger area kind of thing within that. So we need to be open and honest in terms of how we communicate with children. Our personal safety, that means that you should never be in the church here by yourself. There should always be two people present within that. And that's something that Jono follows too. He's not in the church by himself. There's always somebody else that's kind of thing here. It's just a danger thing that if anything was to happen to you, like if you had a medical event, then there's no one here to kind of help you. I was asked early in the piece some time back about climbing ladders within the church here to get up to the lights. And there's certain certification that you need to actually be a certain distance above the floor. But another rule within that is that you must have two people present. Now, some of you may have noticed that when you've been driving around and there's a council worker and they're working down in a drain hole, and you see a person, only ever one, but a person standing at the top of the hole just watching what they're doing. And that's also a legal requirement in terms of there must always be a spotter if there's somebody doing something which could be seen as dangerous. Actually, there's times when I've seen more than one, so maybe they need double spotting, I'm not sure. But personal safety is something that we need to hold true to. Using equipment, we have equipment in the church. If you find there's some damaged equipment, don't just put it back on the shelf where you got it from. Make sure you let the leader know, or not. Make sure you let the board know, or our safety officer know, so that it can be taken care of. Okay, chemical use and storage. Again, not something that everyone is familiar with, but there are rules associated with how we store our chemicals within it. And this applies to our kitchen sort of area, for example, where the fat has to be set. Different sort of parts of it you can't put in a certain shelf. So basically it is, the more dangerous it is, the lower the shelf it has to be on, is the basic rule associated with that. We also have a cupboard which has the cleaning chemicals for the church, and that's locked within that. The final thing, as I said before, that there needs to be a risk assessment for all activities, even if it's just a mental assessment that you have done. So let's talk about emergency evacuation. An emergency evacuation is an actual or an imminent threat which endangers and threatens to endanger the life, property, or the environment, and which requires a significant and coordinated response. So in the emergency, I'm going to go and talk about fire emergencies in just a moment. So can I just say, we also have something called a lockdown emergency. And in a lockdown emergency, someone has noted that there is somebody out in the car park there and they appear to be dangerous with a machete or with a rifle or something within that. Now, in our lockdown process, we need to have our leaders, our wardens within that. They go around and lock all the outdoor doors within the church, and then we congregate here in a central sort of part of the church, and we stay quiet. It's important that we stay quiet. It's important that we don't flash our mobile phone out with the lights coming up from that, because sometimes that's enough to agitate the person out there to want to cause harm. So we come into a quiet area and we quietly wait till the emergency is cleared. So let's go on to the fire emergency. And I'll talk about the impact of a fire. One of the greatest impacts of a fire is the smoke inhalation, and it's responsible for more deaths and incapacitating injuries than burns. So you get carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and an oxygen deficiency that happens fairly rapidly when the fire kind of gets started. I think I'm going to talk about this in a moment, but I'll say it now anyway. Another danger of a fire is the fact that people don't respond well to the initial sort of alarm. Again, in the early days of Access Church here, in the very early days, we had an alarm that actually went off in the church. And what did people do? They stood around looking. Now, when the alarm goes off in the church, that means evacuate. Don't assess whether it's a false alarm or not. You must do an immediate sort of evacuation at that particular point. One of the problems is that if people leave it to the last moment and then start to rush, and this is the really tragic sort of part, you all saw on that Swiss fire recently, and if you noticed carefully in the video that they kind of showed, at the exit at the doorway, there were, hard to say, but piles of people. When people came out, their eyes would have been affected by the smoke, they couldn't see, and they trampled onto other people. So in a moment, when I talk about the actual fire evacuation process, I'll be stressing the point that once you get out of the building, you need to get away from the building. You're not safe until you get away from the building, and we'll talk about those zones in just a moment. So our emergency response, if you're a leader in the church here and there's a need for something catching on fire, so I think the room over here at the back here still has electrical equipment in it. The kitchen also obviously is a place for a fire. But if you notice that there is a fire, our first response is that for R, it says race, but that's just to help us remember, is to rescue people or remove people to get people out of the building. So important for us to evacuate the building. The second thing is to activate the alarm. If you don't know how to activate the alarm for Access Church, you should find out on the way out. There's a little red box out there, and it's got a little cover on the front of it, and you push through the cover and push the button, and that sets the alarm off. That's particularly important because we have people next door that may not see the fire that actually happens here. So the alarm needs to go off. The next thing I've got up there is alert the fire brigade. Our system is not connected to the fire brigade, so if we just stand back and watch it burn, then no one's going to come and help us. So somebody needs to ring the 000 and the fire brigade to kind of come. If we get to the stage where we've got people out and we've activated the alarm, then closing doors is a good strategy. So if there was a fire in the back room here, for example, closing that door would be very helpful, and closing the door at the top here would be very helpful. By confining the fire, we get less oxygen going into it, and the fire won't expand so much. I should have said before on the impact of a fire, one of the things is that fires double in size every 30 seconds. Think about it for a moment. Every 30 seconds, the fire is going to get twice the size that it was. So I'll say this now and probably say it again later. We need to evacuate the church within 2 minutes. That's part of our strategy. We need to get out because the fire has been progressively getting larger during that period of time. And then the final thing is to extinguish. If you are capable and confident to use one of the fire appliances within the church, then you could help with the extinguishing of it. And saying that now, there's a fire extinguisher up the back here. That fire extinguisher is suitable for putting out electrical fires. Same as the extinguisher at the back of the sound desk is suitable for putting out electrical equipment fire. There's an extinguisher out in the front foyer there that's suitable for power, for water and paper. Sorry, well, not water, paper and consumable combustible materials. We also have a fire reel kind of thing within it for water as well. Now in the kitchen, there's a special extinguisher, and that special extinguisher is suitable for putting out fat fires or controlling fat fires. So different extinguishers for different purposes. If you'd like to know how to use an extinguisher, I can give you a crash course that would only take 2 minutes to show you how to actually use it. But different extinguishers for different sort of purposes. So an evacuation needs to be completed within a couple of minutes, and evacuate near the exit, the closest exit door. If you have a look around the building here, you'll notice that there's an exit sign on those two doors, and for some reason or other they haven't put exit signs on those two doors over there. There's an exit sign over here, and there's an exit sign down there. The rule is you go out the nearest exit door to you. The danger in an evacuation is people think, but my child is in the creche sort of area, so I want to go out and get them. And can you imagine the person trying to get through the crowd going that way when everyone else is going this way can be particularly dangerous. So it's safer for you to get out and then go and find your child because they'll be over in the assembly area, which we'll talk about in a minute. In terms of these exit points, you go through that door, you go straight down a passageway, there's another door that leads to the outside, and you turn right, which means you turn on the back of the building here, go to the right. Now, the reason you do that is that there's a big air conditioning unit that's blocking your path on the other side. So don't go left, go right. If you go out that door, again, you're going through that door, and do you stay outside? You get out there and sit down on the ground saying, "Oh," which some people do. No, you've got to keep on going until you get right over to the assembly point, which is on the far side of the car park, over towards the childcare centre. Okay, some other elements associated with our implementation. One is privacy. We have a privacy document, which I think I mentioned before. It's important to know that you will come into private information at times, and it's not something that you can go on and share with other people. So there's a policy document that covers that. We also have data protection processes and systems so that data is not shared or allowed for other people to access. You might notice that if you want to actually get my phone number, for example, if you go onto the website and try to get it through our recording sort of system, you can't get it because I'm not part of your group. So I can get the information about the seniors group and those members, but it's restricted within that. And that's part of our privacy process within it. But we all have a role and responsibility in relation to protection. The other thing with the confidentiality is that sometimes kids come up with all sorts of cute stories about what's happening at home. And that's not something that you should share. You just keep it to yourself, kind of thing within that. Confidentiality means that you can tell the pastor and the responsible people within the church the information that they need to know, but you don't share the information with people who don't need to know that. One of the things that we do is that you've been given a form which is called the Leaders and Volunteers Emergency Contact and Declaration Form. Is that correct? You've got one of those? Yes? Terrific. This form is important for your protection and safety. I'll tell you a little bit of a war story. When I was a principal out in a rural sort of area, I had a teacher that didn't turn up for school one day. And that's very difficult because I was a teaching principal. There's only 4 teachers in the school. They didn't turn up, so of course it's a problem. Normally if people let you know in advance, you organise a replacement kind of thing for them. But this person just didn't turn up, and where are they? So I knew, fortunately, where they were billeted in the next town, which was 20 minutes away. So I rang the family that they were billeting with and said, are they sick, or where are they today? And they said, oh no, they left for work this morning. So here you got a situation where a person has left for work and hasn't turned up at that particular point in time. Now that's much of a problem in itself, but when the police turned up, because obviously we had to contact the police, when the police turn up, they have all these questions that they want to ask you. And you suddenly realise, I don't know that person as well as I thought I did. And part of this document is to, if there was an emergency sort of situation, whether it's a medical sort of situation, within that we have some information about you. So please don't write anything on the document that you don't want a policeman to read or don't want a health professional to read within that. But it's for your safety within that. But one of the things that is on the sheet too is a declaration. And I'll read this out in full because this is an important thing again. I declare that there are no impediments to me taking on this or these positions. I agree to bring to the attention of the pastor any future issue that may make me unsuitable or seen to be unsuitable to hold this position. Even the seen to be unsuitable is important because the reputation of our church is important if we're going to encourage people or be welcoming or having new people kind of coming in. So if I agree to submit to the leadership of the church and to follow the People Protection and Risk Management document, which is what you've got, and other procedural requirements of the church. And you'll be asked to sign that today as an agreement to that, as well as providing your other information about you personally. Okay, another document that we use is the Code of Conduct, and you've been given a copy of that as well. In the Code of Conduct, I agree to abide by this Code of Conduct during my service within the church, and again, I will advise the pastor if I fail to comply. So in the Code of Conduct, it's a broader sort of sweep in terms of character sort of parts that sit within that. And understand that if you breach the Code of Conduct as per that document, you may lead to be, this is using formal language, but you may need to be terminated. That doesn't mean shot, it just means that you can't continue in your role kind of thing within the church. There are 3 types of declaration forms. They are all very similar, but I remember I actually prepared these documents, and when I first prepared it, it was just a global document for everybody in the Wesleyan Methodist Church in Australia to fill out. And The difficulty is that there are some specialised things associated that we need to emphasise for children, and there are some things that need to be emphasised for board members. So there's 3 slight variations. They're not hugely different, but just there's some slight tweaking on the side. But we ask you to fill out that declaration form, and you get asked to fill that every single year. So I encourage you to do that. If you can't do it before you leave today, then you make sure that you bring it back to church and give it to Deb. In the accreditation for ministry, I mentioned before that we can fall into the habit of churches that we're so desperate for workers that if you put your hand up, we'll take you. And unfortunately, we can't do that anymore within the church because the church is made up of the world, and unfortunately in the world there are people that would seek to do harm. Some research would tell you that churches are target areas for people who wish to do harm, for example, to children. Because we are warm and welcoming to everybody that kind of comes within that. So the accreditation for music for ministry goes through 5 different sort of areas. In the first area, we need to be aware of the person's calling. I should also emphasise that this sort of model can be used for pastors when they're taking up or thinking of taking up ministry to work out their suitability for actually performing in the role. So first one is calling, and it's central. We're called to serve, we're dependent on God's grace and power, but we are willing to help out. The second aspect is credential. To have a credential to actually work with children or around children or to know anything about children's data and everything else, you must hold in Queensland a blue card. In other states it's called a Working with Children check. And there's another name for the Northern Territory, or the Ochre card in the Northern Territory. So different names in different places, but all very similar. You need to have that sort of credential, having a blue card that says that you are entitled to work with children. As soon as you lose your blue card, you must inform the church straight away. They will be informed, but there can sometimes be a bit of a lag that kind of occurs. So if you lose your blue, not physically lose it, but lose it as in it gets taken off you, you need to let the church know immediately within that. Another part within being a leader, as opposed to an assistant leader, you need to be mature in the faith, you need to be over 18, and we want you to be a member of Access Church too as a leader. The next area is in terms of qualification. And qualification is the knowledge, the process, the skills, and the affects, or the attitudinal sort of things that are appropriate for the job. A lot of people, when they start in a role, whether it's a volunteer or whatever, don't necessarily feel all that comfortable or confident within that. So they're growing on the job. So this is not disclosing or not dismissing that, but it's sort of saying to us that we need to make sure that we make ourselves qualified to do the job. So if you need to do some reading, if you need to talk to somebody about your role, get yourself qualified with the knowledge, skills and process, and have the right attitude towards the job. The next one is the fit. How well is the person fit? Who loves working with very young children? That's not a lot of people. Who doesn't like working with very young children? Okay, and that's really what fit's all about. It just says that for some of us, we are more suitable to certain roles than we are to others. So in terms of the measure of a person's suitability, we look at their fit. How well do they actually slot into this particular position within that? So we vet people for ministry. We look at their personality. We look at their motivation. And then the final aspect of accreditation or suitability for ministry is the character, and that's as demonstrated or shown within your code of conduct sort of form that you will fill out for us. Okay, in conclusion, look at that, I'm right on time. Damien's going to do a little session at the end of this, but we want to finish within about the hour. We ask you to complete the Code of Conduct form, the Leaders and Volunteers Emergency Contact and Declaration sort of sheet needs to be filled out. Forget about the next thing, the attendance sign-on. That will be worked out from your other sheet. And knowing that there is support kind of thing available within the church. Les Morgan, would you like to stand up? Everyone have a look at Les. Les is our safety officer for the church. Now, it doesn't mean you can only tell him. You can tell board members or anyone else kind of thing, but he is just another resource person that you've got to let know. I'm worried about the fact that this power switch keeps on sparking every time I put a cable into it or whatever. Let him know so he can take attention to that. Point out to him if one of the emergency evacuation lights is not functioning anymore. Anything like that, let him know. If you find something like a mat is not sort of sitting right, do it yourself. But if you find a major thing, Les is the person that can help kind of fix that in the long term. I also mentioned board members. You can see, our board members. You can contact them and tell them about something that you're concerned about. We also have Deb. Wave, Deb. Deb is our founder of All Knowledge and probably undervalued by us, but we appreciate her, and you can let her know as well, and she'll direct you to the right person who will take the message on. And if all else fails and you have a pen, you can write down my email address, which is my church email address, jeff.adams.wesleyanmethodistchurch@gmail.com. I thank you again for your attendance, and I thank you that you managed to stay with not too many people leaving. I haven't really got time because I'll promise that I'll finish in a certain time. But if you want to see me afterwards, or if you want to see me on another day at church, I'm only too happy to answer questions within that. Is Damien in the room? Over to you, big fella.
Yeah, give Jeff a big round of applause. Huge amount of work that goes into this. You can take all of that if you want. We can do this together. I just want to say a sentence or two. Then we're going to pray. Then I'm going to dismiss you and just ask the kids team to stick around. So I just want to say this. As we continue to grow in our ministries, our church is growing. We are reviewing processes and procedures to ensure that we are always working to be as safe as possible and as compliant as possible. We're currently reviewing many of these documents that Jeff's spoken about to ensure how and where these are communicated is clear, accessible, and relevant for the people who need to know it, and accurate for where our church is now and where it's heading. So just know that this is, although static, is also dynamic in the sense that we're always trying to do this well. We want to be a safe church. We want to be a church where people know that if they're a part of what we're doing here, that it is safe to do that. And so we are going to continue always to do our very best to be a space where people feel safe dropping their kids off, being a part of our church, and they can belong here. So big round of applause for Jeff, who makes all that happen. I'm going to pray and I'm going to dismiss you. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for Jeff's work here. Thank you so much for protection measures, like policies, like procedures, like government guidelines. Sometimes we think that they're really annoying and they're restrictive, but actually, Father, we know that it helps us keep us safe. And so as a church, help us be really good stewards with that. Help us do that really diligently. We pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen. Quick transition, so please.